All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get a swig of coffee here. I'm still trying to wake up. This morning, just want to kind of have a little chat. I finally finished, and this is going to be a talk about Shelby Foote, the Civil War historian slash novelist. He calls himself a novelist, not so much a historian, but his work here. I finally finished this. This is volume 1 of his 3-volume Civil War set. This covers Fort Sumter to just past Perrysville. So it begins just before Fort Sumter and then takes you up to the end of 1862. It took me a long time to finish this edition here. The page count, let's see, 810 pages. Of course, Shelby Foote, Mississippi, he has been criticized here in recent times for being a pusher of the lost cause narrative, which in my opinion is a false accusation. Even though he has clearly Southern sympathies and he's open about it, he points out things like the fact that Jefferson Davis suspended habeas corpus, the right to law. Habeas corpus, you have the body. Right to legal representation. He also instituted a draft. Now, I knew that Lincoln had done these things, so that was something I learned from this book. I just want to get into some of the criticism that Shelby Foote has gotten from historians. The fact that he did not footmark, he didn't put footnotes in his narrative. He talks about this in the back, the biographical note here as to why he didn't do it. He says, for instance, let me find a good excerpt. Okay, so he gives a list here in the back of the book in the biographical note of all of the sources that he used for the composition of his narrative history. The War of the Rebellion, a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate armies, and a 30-volume set, official records of the Union and Confederate navies in the War of the Rebellion. He also has large volumes published in 1887 under the title Battles and Leaders of the Civil War. And he's got a whole other list of memoirs and writings of generals and stuff that's in here, cabinet members and whatnot. This is the part I want to get to on page 815. He says, "A word I suppose is in order as to the use I made of these materials, original and secondary, not only because it's customary, but also because it appears to be necessary, at least in certain eyes. One of the best of the later day authorities, in the course of his careful documented exegesis, cautions against accepting the testimony of Lew Wallace as to what took place at a council of war preceding the march on Donelson. Recollections of events long past are always to be suspected, he explains, and especially when set down by a writer of fiction. Wallace then was doubly suspect. He had waited, and he had written the fair God and been her. He was a novelist." Here Shelby Foote gives his approach. He says, "Well, I am a novelist, and what is more, I agree with D.H. Lawrence's estimate of the novel as, quote, the one bright book of life, unquote. I might also agree with the professor quoted above, but only by considering each witness on his merit, his devotion as a writer to what should be his main concern. The point I would make is that the novelist and the historian are seeking the same thing, the truth. Not a different truth, the same truth. Only they reach it or try to reach it by different routes. whether the event took place in a world now gone to dust, preserved by documents and evaluated by scholarship, or in the imagination preserved by memory and distilled by the creative process, they both want to tell us how it was, to recreate it by their separate methods and make it live again in the world around them. This has been my aim as well, only I have combined the two. Accepting the historian's standards without his paraphernalia, I have employed the novelist's methods without his license. Instead of inventing characters and incidents, I searched them out, and having found them, I took them as they were. Nothing is included here, either within or outside quotation marks, without the authority of documentary evidence, which I consider sound. Although I have left out footnotes, believing that they would detract from the book's narrative quality by intermittently shattering the illusion that the observer is not so much reading a book as sharing an experience, I have thought it proper to employ the 3 dots of Elysian to signify the omission of interior matter from quotations. In all respects, the book is as accurate as care and hard work could make it. Partly I've done this for my own satisfaction, for in writing a history, I would no more be false to a fact dug out of a valid document than I would be false to a fact dug out of my head in writing a novel. Also, I've tried for accuracy because I've never known a modern historical instance where the truth was not superior to distortion by any standard and in every way. Wherever the choice lay between soundness and color, soundness had it every time. Many problems were encountered in the course of all this study, but lack of color in the original materials was never one of them. In fact, there was the rub. Such heartbreak as was here involved came not from trying to decide what to include, but rather from trying to decide what to omit. And in the end, the omissions far outnumbered the inclusions. And here he tells you clearly his biases. One word more perhaps will not be left out of place. I am a Mississippian. Though the veterans I knew are all dead now. By the way, this is important to note that Shelby Foote actually lived in a time. This first volume, I believe, came out in the 1960s, but he was born, I believe, in I think around 1915. My memory's not mistaken, but he actually knew and met surviving Civil War veterans. So he lived in a time where that was still possible. We're removed enough far from it now where you can't do that anymore, but it was still something that could be done in his day. So he says, though the veterans I knew are all dead now, down to the final home guard drummer boy of my childhood, the remembrance of them is still with me. He says, however, being nearly as far removed from them in time as most of them were removed from combat when they died, I hope I have recovered the respect they had for their opponents until Reconstruction lessened and finally killed it. Wow, Reconstruction. That's a part of history I'm not going to get into right now, but yeah. The important thing to note here is that he's talking about mutual respect that the combatants had for each other, which is something I hate to talk about modernity, but it's what's going on today. People are tearing down stuff and removing it and eliminating it, and you can just see the gross ignorance. For instance, I'm not just talking about the wholesale removal, vandalization, destruction of Confederate monuments. The 54th Regiment, Shaw's regiment, a colored regiment, that the movie Glory was based upon, has been vandalized multiple times by Black Lives Matter, and it's completely absurd that an all-colored regiment's monument has been defaced and vandalized by people that probably are so ignorant they don't even know that that monument is dedicated to a colored regiment. They probably don't even know that a movie starring Matthew Broderick and Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman was made concerning that regiment. That's how ignorant these people are. Point being is that maybe instead of destroying history, you should pick up a book and learn something about it. Then you can judge whether or not it needs to be purged. Shelby Foote continues, biased is the last thing I would be. I yield to no one in my admiration for heroism and ability, no matter which side of the line a man was born or fought on when the war broke out. 17 years ago, if pride in the resistance my forebears made against the odds has leaned me to any degree in their direction, I hope will be seen to amount to no more in the end than an average American's normal sympathy for the underdog in a fight. I think that the man is unjustly criticized. In fact, I've even heard people saying, I think even Ken Burns, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think even Ken Burns has come around to the attacks that are leveled against Shelby Foote as being some kind of lost causer and a proponent of the lost cause myth. If you've actually read the man's work, he's very transparent, and he is open that the end of slavery was a good thing, but the cost that was paid for it is a tragedy. One thing I want to say about reading this, one of the critiques leveled at Shelby Foote is he doesn't have the socio-economic factors that are involved in here, the background for it. So I do want to say, if you know nothing about the Civil War going into this, and I highly recommend reading Shelby Foote's narrative. I finished this. It took me a great deal of time to get through it because of the narrative quality of the thing. It's not like reading a dry history. I feel myself caught in the events as if I'm an observer, as if I'm actually there. And that is the power of a novelist. When historians are just relaying factual information to you, it doesn't have the same effect. There is a narrative quality, which is the way that he did it, which makes it feel like you're in the midst of the action. You can smell the powder from the muskets. You can feel the explosions of the shells bursting, and you can hear the screams of the men, and you can see the blood, and you can almost feel like you're transported there. It has the power of the novelist to be able to transport the human mind and immerse it in these events. I had to put the book down several times because it's painful. This is a very tragic event in our history where people that were family members even killed each other. I mean, I looked into my own past and family tree information, and on my mother's side, I have relatives that fought for the Union, that served underneath General Grant. And then on my father's side, I have family members that were part of Virginia regiments that were attached and fought under Stonewall Jackson. So there is a possibility that at some point during that war, I could have actually have had family members on opposite sides of the battlefield shooting at each other. To me, that's stuff that doesn't go away. Okay, this is why this part of history is something that, it fascinates me, it interests me, because when we had the War of the Revolution, the Revolutionary War, it gained us our independence from the British Crown. But there was a political, ideological war, and I'm not trying to set, the issue of slavery aside here at all. I agree with Shelby Foote. Slavery, emancipation is a good thing. It's tragic that there was people that were held in the bonds of slavery, but we have to think that the plight of slavery is was nothing new. And the Egyptians practiced it. The Hebrews practiced it. It's a practice that was carried down through history. I mean, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they all took slaves. It's something that has been done since the beginning of time. After Cain slew Abel and people became nation states and they started warring and enslaving one another. Wars of conquest, you know. So we ought not to think that the practice of slavery is something that is a problem of solely the white man. That's just not being honest. You know, every major civilization has committed acts of atrocity against other people as recently as, I mean, look at World War II, you know. And I'm not just talking about what Hitler did to his political rivals and foes, but the animosity that took place between the Japanese and Chinese people. You know, the rape of Nanking, for instance, the Burma Death March. History is littered with acts of atrocity committed by all races, creeds, and colors because sin is the problem in the human heart. Okay, we all have the propensity within ourselves because of the free will we're given by God to commit good or to commit evil. But I want to set that issue aside now and get back to the shortcomings, alleged shortcomings. There's a lot of wind out here and I hope that it's not completely destroying this recording. But I want to recommend this book as a primer. This is A Short History of the Civil War by James L. Stokesbury. And this book will help you to know some of the political factors, some of the things that went on. And I like this because it's very even-handed. Okay, I believe Stokesbury was Canadian, so he's kind of detached from the events in a way that Americans are not. So it's very unbiased. One of the things here that he'll get into right at the beginning is the economic factors involved, some of the political differences. He talks a little bit about George C. Calhoun, the 1850s, building up to the Civil War itself. And although the bulk of the book is going to be focused on chapter 2 here, settlement to succession, it's the expansion out west, talking about the fact of life. It's hard for us to get into the mindset of people in the past, but here on page 12 of Stokesbury's book, he says, when Americans have disagreed about almost every aspect of the Civil War, including even what to call it, though the Civil War is now generally accepted, in the years immediately after it ended, it was often called the War of Rebellion, as in the publication of the official records. Southerners tended to like to call it the War of Southern Independence, which created parallels with the American Revolution, and some Northerners, though not many, preferred the war to free the slaves. This never really gained much popular support because Southerners denied that they were fighting to keep the slaves from being freed, and the majority of the Northerners denied that they were fighting to free them. The term Civil War is in fact a fairly neutral one, which carries little tangible baggage, while any of these other names carries too much implication as to causes and motivations, thus is unacceptable to one segment or another of opinion. This is very good. This is not a real long narrative. The reason why I like to recommend this one is because it covers the entirety of the war, okay, in 329 pages. Let's just put, for instance, this volume 1 of the Civil War by Shelby Foote, this is like 800 and I think 10 to 15 pages, and this is the shortest volume of the 3 in the set. That gives you an idea of what you're in for when you start to read this thing. So let's see, 810 pages. So I would recommend, if you know nothing about the American Civil War, read this first, okay, and then begin reading Shelby Foote's narrative. It's going to take you some time to get through it. The second thing I want to recommend to you, if you're going to read this, is to get this book here, okay? The Civil War, the story of the war with maps. This is going to help you to know what's going on. So when Shelby Foote's talking about where the troops are marching, where they're at, battlefields, it's helpful to have a companion piece, because even though he has maps in his book, there aren't very many of them, and this here will give you a good idea of the territory, where these battles are taking place. It basically has a month-by-month breakdown. So here you have 1861 spring and summer. You have May, June, July, with a short little summary. It shows you troop movements. For instance, here you can see in the map McClellan, where he's at. You can see down here in Tennessee. Okay, and he has little markers that tell you where these battles are taking place and some of the movements that are taking place of these troops and whatnot. And occasionally you'll get a larger view where he'll go into some of these things. So here you go. You've got a McClellan, Washington D.C. defense here. It's a blown up view. So this book is very helpful. Very helpful in being an aid. For instance, here's a breakdown of the Battle of Shiloh, which features in this first narrative. Okay, first battle. Here's a blow up of the Shenandoah Valley, all right, for the Jackson's campaign. So I just want to say this is very helpful. So I hope that helps. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole lot here on the book proper and reading excerpts from it and whatnot, but I just do want to say that this is must read. This book it took Shelby Foote, I believe, 20 years to complete his 3 volumes. This was a labor of love. It's the man's magnum opus. It's his legacy he left behind, and it's something I will admit that when I pick it up and read it, I find myself reading 40, 50 pages at a time. It's just when I set it down, it's hard for me to pick it back up again, because you're transported there. You feel the events. So I think that's high praise that he's able to do that. Of course, it's because he is a very good writer. Anyways, that's all I got to say. I just started the second volume a couple days ago, and I'm going to try to get to the middle of the book. I believe is where Gettysburg takes place by July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, in there. I want to try to get caught up so that I'm reading that at the same time as the anniversary of that actual battle took place. I want to try to finish these books. I really took way too long reading this. It probably took me about 18 months to get through this first volume, and I want to get through the second and third volume faster. I'd like to have all 3 of them finished, by this time next year. I'd like to have read through all 3 of them. That's a goal I have, but I'm always reading like 2 or 3 things at the same time. I just want to say this was thoroughly enjoyable, and I highly recommend it to anybody out there that wants to know about the Civil War. As far as I'm concerned, this is the definitive set to own. It's just the best. And if, I suspect that volume 2 and 3 are going to be just as good as this one. It's just, I really don't know what else to say about it. So thanks for watching. God bless. Have a wonderful day.